I'm ChosenArchitect, and this is All the Mods 9 to the Sky. So today is the big day, the day that we make the Mekanism Fission Reactor. And now this reactor is going to utilize fissile fuel, and if you missed last episode, be sure to check it out. All of these machines that are set up right here is a modular solution to fissile fuel production. So as we continue to build our fission reactor, which by the way is going to be up top here, it's going to allow us to scale it up to be able to support the size reactor that we build. And speaking of the size of the reactor, I really want to go with an 11 by 11 by 18 tall. So the base platform is going to be 11 blocks this way, and then 18 blocks in this direction. Now, as far as the outside blocks go, these are fission reactor casings, and I'm going to be using these, which do require a bit of lead in order to make, but I'm going to be using these along with some actual reactor glass, so that way we can see the interior. And this is yet again another great example of the building gadgets definitely putting in the work. I mean, because it just makes it so effortless to build out these machines, especially when there's a ton of resource involved, for example, with what we're doing right here. So yeah, definitely recommend if you're going to be building something as big as this, utilize the tools you have, for example, building gadgets, and also the wand. Like building wands, I have made an infinity wand. It just requires another star, and it's an unlimited, unbreakable building wand, which is going to help me with the interior section. Now, bear in mind the size of the reactor, for example, that I'm setting up does require a lot of materials. Just the middle section alone is going to require like, I don't know, 615 rods or something crazy like that. So the middle section, let me go ahead and try to explain that. We are going to need these fission assemblies. This is the thing we're going to need 615 of. So if I go ahead and craft like 615 of them, oh boy. I mean, that's what we're going to need, so I got to go ahead and get them crafted, but it is going to take a little bit of time to do that. Now, the way I want to set these up is I want to have them kind of going checkerboard pattern, just like so, along this line. And that means I'm going to have 41 in the total center here. So that means when I'm fully done, I'm also going to need 41 control rod assemblies, which go at the top of the setup. So for example, with all of those crafted up, I'm going to go ahead and start placing in my fill rod assemblies. These are going to fill up the entire section, except for the very top row here. And so in this case, because this is 18 blocks tall, we have a 16 block interior, meaning 15 blocks tall are going to be these fusion rod assemblies. Because the top row of this setup, we actually have to save room for the other material, which is going to be our control rod assemblies. Just like this, I am getting all of these placed in. Of course, I'm not placing anything on this outer side. This is going to be like reactor glass, which we're going to dive into here in a second. I need to get a bunch of that produced because that's probably one of the largest amounts of items that we're going to need outside of these fuel assemblies. Oh, and by the way, this is why using the wand is so helpful. Just building this massive reactor can be easily done with this setup here. And just like that, that should have been the exact amount needed if I did my math correctly. Looks like I'm getting a little bit better at doing my math. But I can go ahead now and put the control rod assemblies in my offhand, and then right click here, and now my control rod assemblies should be all in place. And of course, if my other math was correct, that math should also be correct. And now we have a very large reactor just about ready to go. We've just got to get our glass in and then talk about our IO ports. So yeah, the exact number of this is 576 that was needed, if I did my math correctly, which would be like a 16 interior by 9, and then we multiply that by 4 after getting those multiplied. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot, but thankfully we can use our building gadget yet again, and that's also not accounting for the ports that I'm going to be taking up, so that is something to note there. But I'm just going to go ahead and expand this very, very quickly. Another thing I could do to make this go very fast is use the building wands. If I place this on the sides here, you can build this very quickly with the wands. Let me go ahead and show you. So with all of that in place, because of the way the building wands work, they will actually connect the sides here, meaning that if I have all of this glass in my inventory, I should be able to continue building this up, and this goes all the way around. So very, very powerful in getting this thing constructed. And we're almost done. Nice. So notice the particle effects. That means this structure has completed its multi-block, but it's not done yet. We can access everything, but we have no IO ports and there's nothing going into it. So now we need to set up the IO ports. input and output. So now when it comes to those IO ports, we're going to go ahead and place them here in the front. So I think right in the middle is where I actually want my output to be for our actual waste. So the main thing, we're going to be sending this a product, we're sending in fissile fuel, and we're expecting a waste byproduct back. So we can make the polonium and the plutonium pellets. These basically come from the nuclear waste that is generated from processing that fissile fuel. You can see that in this recipe here. So this is going to take water, it's going to burn this, and it's going to produce steam and the nuclear waste. And the nuclear waste is what we really have to handle. So what I'm thinking is I'm going to have my redstone control, we're going to set up in a minute, but I need the middle port to be where I output, because I'm going to have some machines here that are going to be doing some processing. And then later on, those machines are going to also be sending to waste barrels, which we'll have to handle. And then after I'm done with these machines, because eventually we're not going to need them anymore, that's when we're going to send it all over to an SPS casing, which is then going to be turning all of our waste into, as you guessed it, antimatter, which is ultimately the goal of this big old reactor right here. You could also produce power from it, but in our case, we're not really going to be producing power from this, even though you could technically set up some big turbines, which we could have done. But in this particular setup, we actually don't need to due to the water. We're going to talk about that too. So to be able to change the port, we can actually right click on this once the multi-block has been reassembled, and we should be able to configure this. Let's see, this probably needs to be in wrench mode, possibly, or maybe it's not wrench mode. Does it need to be in like fluid types? We're supposed to be able to shift right click. There we go. So I'm able to shift right click this, and it says valve change to waste output, or output waste. That's exactly what we wanted to do. We are going to be outputting waste from this one. And then over here, we are going to, for example, deal with steam. And so this could be output coolant, which is our steam. Over here, we are going to need a place to give it water. And so we can have this one here. And this, I think, can be set to regular input, just like that. And then up here, I'm going to place one. And this is going to be where we actually insert our fissile fuel. That's also going to remain an input. So we have all of our main setup, our valves here. The only thing I'm a little concerned about is making sure that we can handle the amount of steam, and I'm going to be voiding that steam. Typically you would use it, like I was mentioning, but I want to avoid it in this case. We're able to use a trash can to do that, but I've got to figure out if we are going to need more than one of these ports, because usually I have had or dealt with in the past needing to use more than one, but we'll see. Now this next step is probably one of the most important, and that is making sure this thing does not overheat and blow up. So you definitely don't want that to happen, and there is a way that we can actually prevent that from happening by using these redstone logic adapters. So I want to make sure in my own world that this thing does not go boom. That would be devastating and would cripple this whole setup that we have going here, because I would constantly be receiving tick damage due to radiation and would probably eventually die, and would have to somehow make a suit to prevent all of this from happening. So in this particular case, what I'm going to do, place in my adapters, and these are very important. So essentially we need an adapter that is going to go, let's just put it right here, and this is going to be the control that turns the machine on or off. So we have the activation mode, which is what we want, and what we'll do is this says when this says is activated, and when powered it will deactivate, right? Deactivate when unpowered. So as long as it's receiving a signal, it will remain on. And it says it'll deactivate when it doesn't receive a signal. So technically we want this to be on. We want the reactor to be on. So we're going to be able to do that by utilizing a NOT gate, because these will actually send signals. If I go ahead and add some of these, let's, for example, place in a couple of these bad boys. This is an adapter, adapter, and adapter, adapter. And now when we access these GUIs, we'll see that there are 4 different things. We have high temperature, excess waste, critical damage, and insufficient fuel. Those are all things that we can say emit a signal when those things happen. Output when reactor reaches dangerous temperatures. We want it to send a signal. And all of these we want to have one for each. So each one of these are going to be their own individual setting here. So if it runs out of fuel, we want to shut it off, and so on and so forth. So this is emitting a signal, but when it receives a signal, that's when the reactor's on. So that doesn't make any sense, right? So that's where a NOT gate is going to come into play, essentially a reverse redstone gate. And we can do that by simply applying this here. And what I want to do is use these redstone conduits to control this. So if I place a redstone conduit here, we have a couple of options, but by default, it's not configured properly. So we want to receive the redstone signal from this upper part, and then I want to send by inserting on this side. So this should now be receiving a redstone signal, and it should be sending it into this block here. But we want to actually have these shut off if this ever happens. So all I got to do is connect to these and have that connect to the middle. We don't have to change any of these, just the receiving end. And I want to go ahead and on this, I want to have it say insert. And so now if these send a redstone signal, it's going to get sent to this NOT gate, which should invert the NOT gate. So just to show that right here, we do this. And notice, by the way, this is set up correctly, right? There is no fuel in here, so one of these are going to activate. And so as soon as I have that insert here, you see that this has flipped, and this is no longer receiving power, which is important because technically this machine is off. We don't want it running just yet. And this one is technically on. And I don't know if it shows it while you're in the inventory. Status outputting. So yes, this is actually the one sending. This one's set to idle. This one's idle. And this one's idle. Now, another thing that we can do is within Mekanism, which I kind of like, if these are receiving a signal down here, we can have an alarm. So just as an example, because this thing can get kind of annoying, we definitely don't want it running right now while we're setting it up. We can go ahead and place a cog block, and I can go ahead and set that to insert. This is going to send a redstone signal into the cog block, and then we can just place an alarm on here. Yeah, it's super loud, super obnoxious. I don't want it going right now, but it is an example that basically we know when these are emitting a redstone signal and when this is actively turning this on or off. With that, I feel a lot more comfortable about having this massive bomb essentially in my base due to those being able to shut this thing off in case things start to go awry. So now I think it's a good time to start working on sending the water into this and also dealing with our output. And so let's first deal with our water input. Now in this pack, and this is very dependent on the pack, but in this particular pack, we do have integrated tunnels, which is insanely powerful for this very reason. So if we dive into integrated dynamics, we simply just need a sink and we need a single fluid interface that is going to be attached to the sink, acting as its network. And then we're going to use an exporter to export from the network into our fission reactor. And so by adding ourselves a cable here, we're going to be able to pull water from the sink into the reactor. And to be able to do this, we need to go under the export all fluids and just place a variable card. Now that is going to automatically start sending water to it. You can see that going right now, but that's not very fast. To be able to make it faster, we need to go into the channel properties and then go all the way over to the transfer rate and then set this to all the way until it goes, hey, you can't do that. And then you go back one, and that is the max transfer rate. And this will just instantaneously fill this thing with water. This one setup right here makes this reactor insanely easy to set up because otherwise you would have to go through some very complicated sort of setups to be able to make sure you can get enough water back routed into this thing. So now let's also talk about waste, because I don't know if this same thing will work with the waste. If it does, that would be fantastic. I have not actually tested that, so that'll be something to definitely sort of play around with once we get some steam in here. But as of right now, we don't have that going yet, so I'm not going to worry about it just yet. So also, before we actually set up the fuel going in here, I really want to get set up the use of our actual waste. And so this is going to require some machines to be set up. And the nuclear waste can be processed in a couple of different ways. So we are going to use an isotropic centrifuge to turn it into plutonium. And then we're going to use a solar neutron activator, which by the way, does require it to be daytime in order to work, to produce polonium. And then these need to be broke down inside of PRCs. Both of them are going to need a PRC, by the way. So it's going to be best to have two PRCs and also have one of each of those machines, and then kind of splitting the fluid between the two. And we're also going to need fluorite and more water. This is where I run into the dreaded problem of not prepping up enough. I actually didn't set up a gas burning generator, which means that I don't have the materials to be able to make the solar neutron activator, because it does require an HDPE sheet, and this is 100% on my part that I missed this. But I guess we can go ahead and easily set this up as it only requires a couple of machines. So to be able to produce HDPE sheets, we need to make pellets, and that is going to bring us back into a little bit of an assembly line that's going to require oxygen. It's going to require taking some biofuel and also turning things into substrate. So a little bit of chemicals. Let me show you probably the easiest way to set this up. So I already have sort of a template set up for this. I'm going to have a crusher that is going to be receiving moss. So we are going to need a way to get said moss. So it's going to be like this with a bone block on top. And this is how we're going to produce an abundant amount of it. And that should be able to automatically send into our crusher, which is kind of nice, right? That's just going to go straight in here. And then the crusher is then going to process this into our biofuel. Then the biofuel then needs to be processed in its own right to produce substrate. So this machine is going to need hydrogen, and then it's also going to need water. So water I can provide to it very easily, but we are going to need a hydrogen channel up here. So I'm going to go ahead and set that, and then make sure this is all clear underneath the gases section. And then we're going to output into this machine automatically, and that should give it hydrogen. Now in the back, I'm just going to bring this up since it needs water, and we already have water piping from here. So that should give us the water we need. And so the only thing left to do is to tell the crusher, hey, automatically output the biofuel into here. And that's going to produce a couple of different things. So what we're going to get is substrate, and we're also going to get ethylene. Now ethylene, we actually get 100 millibuckets of ethylene. And when we go to actually process this substrate, we're going to be utilizing only 50 millibuckets of it. So this leads into a little bit of a problem. You'll end up with a backlog of ethylene in here if you don't have somewhere to store it. And we're going to be storing it inside of a quantum entangle porter. And so I just need to create an ethylene channel, and there we go. So now we are set to ethylene, and we can actually start to receive this. But I'm also going to receive the items from here as well. Might as well do that in the same block since we're going to be taking the items in and sending them into the next machine. So I can actually handle that here with input and make sure the output is set here, auto eject on. And then under the gases, because this is a gas technically, we want the input on, and then we're actually going to be outputting over into the next machine for our ethylene. And you can see ethylene is already starting to fill up in this machine. We just got to tell this one, hey, auto eject the items. And so now you can see the substrate has also passed through this machine and made it over here. And then for our final process, we just need oxygen and utilizing some liquid. Yeah, liquid. I've made a mistake, a little bit of a mistake, but that's easy to actually fix because all we need to do is kind of change up our little machine setup here. So instead, what I'm going to need is a rotary condensator. This changes things up a little bit, but if I just go ahead and place this in, that is going to start turning it into liquid ethylene. And this is going to build up. So I'm actually going to have two outputs here that are going to allow me to send ethylene into this. And then the items, we're probably just going to route through the bottom. And now if you've ever experienced this problem before, you technically I now have this fluid stuck in here. So you can use a gauge dropper, and you should be able to right click this now. And that actually pulls that ethylene back out of this machine and out of that slot. So you can still use this machine. And now you can see liquid ethylene has gone in, and I'm pretty sure the rest of the stuff we're going to need is going to be oxygen. So we just need oxygen set, and then make sure that under our gases tab, this is now set to auto output. And there we go. Now we have oxygen, we have ethylene, and we now have our substrate. And that should be everything we need now to produce the HDPE pellets. And so I guess our final step is making sure we handle all of these fluids correctly. So that's going to go in here, get powered. That's going to produce those sheets. And then we need this to auto output into the enrichment chamber. And then the enrichment chamber, we then need it to produce, and then we can just use an interface. And voila, there we go. So as soon as this produces those materials, it should send it directly here. And by simply adding some logistical transporters down here, our items are now being routed. Now, the only problem with this setup is that thing that I mentioned before with our ethylene potentially building up, and that could lead to this shutting down and no longer working. And I don't really have a good way of grabbing a side of this. Oh, actually, you know what? What I could actually do is I can use an entangled block for this. But if you're thinking about this entangled block, I don't know if this is going to be a good solution. I will definitely come back to this later, but as of right now, this is keeping up, and we only need a certain amount of these pellets anyways. I think for right now, we should just add some speed upgrades and get this thing going. And now with all of this running at max speed, it is now going pretty fast, and we're producing all of the sheets that we're probably going to need. So now for the fun part. So I'm now able to make that solar neutron activator, and I have my isotropic centrifuge. I'm going to go ahead and place both of these in, And these are basically going to receive the input here from the side. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that we have just the gases receiving the input, for example, from the right side, and then from the front, I want it to output. And this is important. We want to make sure we get all of these things set up and configured right away. And like I said, this is a very important part. So this is going to be input from the left and then output from the front. So basically, this is going to have a pipe that runs down here, and we can actually go ahead and get that set up. I believe it's just a pressurized tube. So I'm going to use a mech pressurized tube to receive the gas, the waste gas. That's going to go into both of these. It's going to get split. And we're then going to send that directly into our 2 pressurized reaction chambers. And that is then going to need a crusher. So this crusher is going to need to send out 2 items that it receives, and then on the input, we're going to need to make sure to send fluoride, because both of these are going to need crushed fluoride. And so what we should be able to set up, if we go ahead and make sure this is not set to anything, let's make sure all of the configurations are wiped. I just really don't want to accidentally send something to this. We're going to go underneath the item section and make sure we select fluorite inside of here, because we already have one set up, and we just need to send fluorite directly down. So underneath the item channel, we'll make sure the output is on, and that should send fluoride in here, then to be evenly distributed between these 2 PRCs. Now, as far as our gases go, the only thing I'm really worried about is the actual waste that gets produced in this process. This is the really bad stuff. This is the nuclear waste. And this can only really be sent and voided off in waste barrels, which takes some time. And these barrels right here are going to allow us to sort of just disperse and get rid of this over time. Now, I'm going to need to shrink for this. So I'm going to have to get very tiny. At least that's the goal. Perfect. So now I'm nice and small so I can fit in here, because we're going to need tubes. This is also going to work for storage as well. So I'm going to craft a couple of these tubes, and there we go. So that's going to get to work. And I want to run this on the outside here to avoid the main line, because we're going to end up using this down the road. And I want to make sure there's a clear path so we don't accidentally link these together. This mod can be very tricky and finicky when it comes to all of this stuff, and one mistake can lead to your entire base becoming irradiated. So hopefully you understand my overcautiousness. So what I'll do is I'm going to run these down here, and I'm actually going to connect them a little ways away, so that way when we eventually run this main line a little bit further, we won't have to worry about these technically connecting up. But I do want all of these to be running into these, just like you see here, and I should be able to use my wand to just extend these to cover all of this, just like so. And this allows for a storage of this material, but also will slowly but surely disperse and get rid of this material too over time. One of the best ways of doing that. And I would love to explore other ways of getting rid of this waste, but it is so dangerous to be able to experiment with things like that, unless you're within a creative world and so on and so forth. So now if all is well and I hook this in, we should receive our polonium pellets here and our plutonium pellets inside of this drawer, being auto output directly from this chamber. So to get this party started, all I need to do is I need to tap onto here with the entangle porter, select the appropriate fizzle fuel, set that, and then on the gases tab, make sure the input is now set to output and auto eject. That's going to kick on. I'm going to shut this off real quick. And we should, we just need to make sure that when this starts producing steam, oh boy, which I'm not noticing any steam buildup for some reason, which is kind of interesting, but we should notice hopefully steam starting to be produced. This is the heated cooling tank and then the waste tank. Now, interestingly enough, I'm noticing that this is pulling out the waste, but for some reason, I'm not getting any steam being produced, which is very odd to me because this should be producing a steam byproduct. Oh, there it goes. Now I'm starting to see steam being produced. Okay, so with the steam starting to be produced, I'm assuming it had to reach a certain temperature. We're going to notice this is going to start to fill up. I'm going to go ahead and scram this for right now. And this is where we can start to figure out what we're going to do with that steam. Now, believe it or not, the universal pipes apparently work for this. And actually allows the function of gases to move from one place to another. So I'm wondering if I use an ultimate pipe upgrade, is that going to be like insanely fast? I mean, gas, it can transfer 40,000 millibuckets a tick, it says, which is interesting because the ultimate pressurized tube says it can support 256,000 millibuckets a tick. I guess I'll have to do some trial and error, because typically with these setups, when they are activated, well, it starts to cause some problems where we end up with that still building up in multiple different ways. Now, I'm noticing this right here doesn't really seem like it's receiving anything. So this is really what's taking up. You can see it just did a process there very, very quickly and should have sent polonium over here, or plutonium into here. And then once this receives a certain amount, it will start to work. By the way, first thing I got to do is turn this down. So that is very, very loud. I do want it a little bit. And let's see, I guess now we just need to start playing around with our tick rate, because right now we're not really burning a whole lot. And to do that, we go into the status button, and this is where we start playing around with stuff. So for example, I can go ahead and start with a rate of 20 millibuckets per tick. We were doing, by the way, 0.1. So when we activate this, this is really going to start to kick off. And you can see things are increasing, including our steam, which is not good. So it means that this is definitely not keeping up through the one port. Aha! I think I found a very clever solution to this. So at this current moment, what I've done is I've used an entangle porter, because this port actually auto outputs into things. So I'm outputting into the entangle porter that is set to steam, and essentially under the gases tab, I have input, and then I'm just having it auto output into the trash can. And it seems like that is able to keep up and is super simple. Now, something I was a little bit worried about, I was wondering if this solar neutron activator was actually going to produce because of this cable up here. And yes, it is not able to see the sky because of this goofy redstone conduit that is right here, which is very unfortunate, and I'm gonna have to get rid of this conduit right here and possibly move the logic adapter. So very interesting. I ended up fixing this. It was very weird. I guess after updating this block, I needed to actually place a few blocks up here all the way through this whole line, and I ended up breaking those, and that actually fixed the problem. So now this is actually processing and has now been updated, I guess, to recognize that there's a actual open space above it. So perfect. So that ended up producing our other pellets. So now we can turn this thing back on and really start to figure out now how high we can bring up the amount of fuel that we want this to burn. And so I guess with that, we've now completely set this up. And we need to let it run for quite a while to produce materials before we can start turning it into antimatter. But now we have ourselves polonium pellets, and we also have plutonium pellets, all of which are going to be a part of the all the mods star, technically. So the main thing we need a lot more of, though, are going to be the polonium pellets. So what I have set up right here is this is just running on its own, and is not fully upgraded, and is sending this at a decent rate, and able to keep up with the amount we need. But we really need a lot more of these. So for right now, what I'm doing is I'm letting that build up. But notice the time of day. This is going to start filling up, and we really need to make sure we are sleeping, or that we set up some sort of way of automating day. So to be able to automate this ritual, which is the tablet of sunrise, it's very simple. We just need a few of these logs, and I'm going to set this up to demonstrate. We can actually place this inside of a modular router, make sure the mode is set to, the redstone mode is set to pulsed. We'll place that in its buffer slot, and then we just need to use activator modules. So I want the activator module to activate on the front. Don't really need anything else. We just want it to simply right click, and that will be for this one. And the other one is going to actually activate the ritual. So to do that, simply right click again, but we need to control this a little bit more with redstone, and this one also needs to be pulsed. So I'm going to use the pulse repeaters, and these are going to work very, very well. So this, we will set it to a little bit of delay, like 10 ticks. And then this one will set to a delay of, for example, like 20 ticks. And then we just need to take a daylight sensor, and we can set the daylight sensor up right here. And I'm going to put this in reverse mode to detect when it's nighttime, and it will send a redstone signal when it is nighttime. So what should happen is this will send a signal at the same time, but this is going to pulse first, and then this is going to pulse after that to activate it. And it won't do anything else after that moment. So this should technically be automated, and we should now have daylight automated. We just got to make sure we can craft these sunrise tablets. And there we go. So this worked perfectly. So you see how quickly that went. As soon as it turned night, this activated, and now it is daytime again. So the only thing I have to keep in stock is just making sure I have these tablets of sunrise, and now our base is forever in daytime. Of course, I can turn this off if I want to, but for right now, that is a perfect way to automate day. And so guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Of course, if you did, be sure to click that subscribe button if you haven't already, and give this video a huge thumbs up. Also, comment down below. Is there any other way that you would have done this setup? I would love to hear from you down in the comments below. And, well, with that, it's now time to thank the amazing supporter of today's episode. And that amazing thanks is going to go out to the True Angel King. Thank you so much, by the way, for your amazing support by choosing to support me over on the Discord and becoming a Discord premium member and supporting me in one of the best ways possible. I thank all of my supporters. Thank you all who have supported on all of the different platforms. And I mean, honestly, world downloads and supporter servers are the least I can do. And I thank you all so much. You enabled me to do this job, which is absolutely insane. I really do appreciate it, guys. I'll see you in the next episode. And as always, thanks for watching. Bye.